What was your first car?
No, oh, that's a good question. Actually, I have a really boring car history. Like my first car was a 1984 Toyota Corolla.
Oh.
That I inherited from my older brother when I was 17.
Okay.
Which is like, I realized moving to the East Coast and like being around people from Brooklyn and New York, not everyone drives there in the same way. Like being from Southern California, I was 16 years old and my parents were like, you got to get a car because it would help them out, not having to take me to soccer practice or mock trial.
Yep.
I remember actually my parents picking me up from mock trial. So yeah, a car is life here, as you know.
Yeah.
And that 84 Corolla, as cheap a car as it was like the greatest thing in the world to me.
Reliable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're good cars.
My grandma had a Nissan Datsun forever.
A Datsun,
one of those hatchbacks.
Yeah.
Yeah. But my stepdad is a big car guy, and he had rebuilt a lot of cars with his sons when they were growing up, like Mustangs. And so he had picked up an old Ford Ranchero, a 67 Ford Ranchero. It was a hunter green, like big chrome.
Those it kind of looks like a pickup truck.
It looks like an El Camino.
Yep.
And but it was better. And so I was driving that thing around town. I would have to stand on the brakes usually to get it to stop
because they're not power brakes.
Old disc brakes. And but I would get these looks around town. Like I would just see usually men staring at the Ranchero because it was beautiful, and then they look at me. And then they get this really confused look on their face, like, what's this 16-year-old girl doing behind that wheel?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget over here on Telegraph Road, I was at a stop sign. My friend it was like just one single bench seat. So you could get like 3 people up front, including me, but just one other person. And we're talking, my foot's on the brake, red light, but it wasn't all the way down. And I just rolled right into the car in front of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that was my first car accident.
So did you know how to drive a stick shifter? We are live.
That was automatic, but I did learn how
Danielle?
to drive a stick shift very early because the next car that we got to fix up was a 74 Super Beetle.
Wow.
And that was manual transmission.
What's a Super Beetle?
It's a bug, but it's a specific type of bug. You know, the old Volkswagen
Yeah, of course.
Beetles?
Yeah.
So slightly different body. It was a convertible with yellow. We got it repainted with a black top. I didn't take it to Berkeley first year of college, but second year when we moved out of the dorms and I had some parking in our apartment, I would drive it. We would drive it into the city, drive it around San Francisco, like up and down those hills.
In the Beetle.
Yeah. With a little,
That's
like
a very like 1960s, 70s image. Like, and leaving Berkeley to go to
into San Francisco. Like Haight-Ashbury.
Yes.
Here we come.
But it's like, it's not the 60s when you're doing this.
No,
it's a totally different era.
Great place to like hone your stick shift skills on those hills.
Yeah, that's scary.
But I could park anywhere because it was so small.
I feel like it's a skill that people don't have as much anymore. Is not just stick shifts, but just driving in general.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what I wanted to talk with you about cars, because there is something that's happened. I think we've mentioned it before, actually, on the show, is like there's something that's happened with driving even. And I swear, I mean, this is like sort of like the old men at the coffee shop in the morning conversation, like, why is everyone so bad at driving? But it's got to be the phones, right? Like,
it's everyone on their phone.
It's got to be the phones. Like, how many I mean, you guys see a lot of car accidents, obviously. And when I say see a lot of car accidents, I mean you deal with clients who have been involved in car accidents, and you help them through the litigation process and insurance and stuff like that. But it seems like a lot of them might be distracted. Are there a lot of phone cases? A lot of text cases?
Yeah, phone cases, and now like e-bike cases, because a lot of kids are like racing around on e-bikes. But texting and driving, it's not always documented, but if an officer pulls you over, and now they're always asking like, oh, can I check your phone? And a lot of people just say yes because they're afraid to say no, or they don't know that they can say no. And so officers can just go in and like check the history of their call or their texting to see if they were distracted.
To me, like handing your phone over to a cop is a scary thing.
Correct.
Right?
Don't do it unless they have a warrant that says they're allowed to look at your phone.
But if a cop pulls me over and says, hey, I'd like to look at your phone right now, these are the things that I think lawyers can tell you, and you can watch a YouTube video of like, refuse to talk to them or refuse to, but it takes a little bit of
in the moment.
Yeah. It's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, Ron was telling me last week about an experience he had with a cop pulling him over, and how, Ron's the kind of guy, he has the sort of Bamier method, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
he's a very confident person that was able to. And I was listening to his story, and he was telling me about how he sort of let this cop know, like, that there are legal things that need to happen here, and they're not happening.
When he got pulled over here, over
By
in the corner,
Dargan's.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm sitting here being like,
mhm.
dude, I don't know if I have the confidence to deal with a cop that way. I'm much more of a kind of like a yes, sir. Like, I just want to keep the situation copacetic here because I don't know. I fear something going wrong. Or there's
Be
also
polite. I tell my friends all the time because they'll sit, officers will sit on bars around closing time. I'm sure this goes on everywhere.
Yes.
Around the country, but
Looking for
we know where the
DUIs.
local spots are. And so if they pull you over just by the numbers because you're leaving at a specific area at a specific time, then you can politely say, I tell my friends all the time, if they say, like, where are you going or have you been drinking? And I tell my friends, like, blame it on me. Like, I'm so sorry, officer. I know you're just doing your job. I would love to answer your question, but like my friend or my daughter is an attorney and she'd kill me if I didn't exercise my constitutional right to remain silent. So anyone
good.
can use that.
That's really good.
Anyone can use that because it's polite.
Yeah.
It's funny. It gives them the reason why you are saying no as opposed to them, being suspicious.
That's the thing. And it's like, there's a lot of videos that like these dudes make with their dash cams where they're like telling the cops like, oh, that's not legal. They're explaining all the constitutional amendments and things to them. And you can tell like certain cops are annoyed by this sort of thing, especially when it's like clearly being like made for social media content.
Yes.
But like,
how dare you educate people as to their constitutional rights?
Right. But at the same time, it's sort of like, that there, I guess there's a way of saying that, like, without seeming like the person that's telling the cop I'm smarter than you.
Yeah.
I because I have a lot of family and friends in law enforcement and lawyers in general, so I could say the same thing. Like, oh, I have a lot of friends in law enforcement, but I don't know. It's like.
Yeah, they would kill me, officer, if I didn't exercise my constitutional right to remain silent. I would never hear the end of it.
There's also like, I don't know, I've read cases, and I know this, I don't expect this is the absolute norm, but I've read cases about cops like going through phones and looking for more than just like when you were texting, and even like taking girls' pictures and things, like getting into like really nasty shit. I know that like some of that stuff has been exposed and people have gotten in trouble for it, but it's also a concern. I'm just like, this is my phone. The phone is such a personal item. That's the thing.
It is. It's our lives.
Yeah.
It is our lives. And so now the officers will ask for passcode. What's your like, if you hand the phone if you hand your phone to the police officer and they see that there's a password, then what's their next question going to be? What's your password? If you give it to them, they are in your phone. And you have consented. Yes.
Like, yeah.
You have consented. So we have to know that you can say no. It is okay to say no. And set boundaries. That's why we have the Constitution. And it is a scary situation because they have a lot of power. And unfortunately, some will abuse it. So that's why, you just have to stand your ground. And
oh, so much can happen in a car. In terms of big car accident cases that you've handled, are there any that stick out as like particularly memorable? People or cases or situations, because I feel like we talked about this last time when you're running a law firm and a firm that does personal injury, there's a sort of like, there can be like a gristmill element to it, and we've talked about some of those like 1-800 lawyer sort of firms that are really just like cranking out these personal injury cases.
Sure.
But they're also, all of them are different, and all of them are human beings that have been through some like traumatic thing. Are there ones that like stick out to you over the years?
Many, because everyone is different. Even when I'm in the car, I don't know if you've ever had this thought and you're on the freeway or you see someone next to you on the freeway who is on their phone, not paying attention, or maybe someone who starts to swerve into your lane. And you just have to wonder, it's like, am I going to be lucky today commuting, or am I going to be unlucky? Because we know accidents happen all the time. Some of them can be deadly and catastrophic. So sometimes it just feels like luck of the draw.
Yes.
But we had one woman who had undergone a really intense but successful back surgery in Los Angeles. And she was in the hospital for at least a week after to recover. She was doing well. She was a few weeks after being home, like starting to move, and was driving to a follow-up appointment back in Los Angeles and got rear-ended by a big commercial vehicle. and it popped out all the screws from the surgery.
God.
Not only did it undo where she had just been fixed, but it put her in such a worse position. And whereas that prior surgery had been successful and would have cured a lot that was wrong with her back, here there was really nothing anybody was going to be able to do to give her mobility and a pain-free life.
Oy.
Yeah.
The
So it's
luck
like,
of that, though, like 2 car accidents.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Some people go through their whole lives with no car accidents. I'm knocking on wood over here.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Whereas others are like plagued by them. And I mean, and they're not bad drivers,
No,
right?
no. Sometimes it's not their fault at all, and it can happen multiple times. I mean, other times there's things we do that put ourselves in the situation, right? If you drive tired or too fast or what have you.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not. But to go back to your question about how each case is individual, and I think what we were able to do for her is harness technology, and this was a while ago before it was being as commonly used, to recreate the accident in a visual video format to play at mediation. So that
Interesting.
even we went into early mediation with the carrier to try to spare her then the additional pain of having to relive it through a deposition. And so there are many companies out there now that will allow you to take all of your data and put it into a model so that then the mediator, or then later the judge or the jury, can watch this accident happening.
What does it look like? Is it an animation?
Yeah. I mean, but
Like a
it's
computer
more
animation?
it's more sophisticated now, where it looks more lifelike. But back then, yeah, it was almost like a computer game. But it was all the facts. It was on the freeway where it had happened. You see the larger commercial vehicle coming in from behind,
Amazing.
crunching the car, and then it showed actual screws popping out of her spine and her back in the animation.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what to me, I'm thinking of like, is that evidence? Is that really what happened? Is that a version of what happened? Because, we talk about like AI, and like, I don't know if you've seen any of these videos of what AI can do now.
Sure,
Like,
the
people,
deep fakes.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
can put like I'm imagining now, like, oh, you're working a car accident as a personal injury attorney, and you're able to like put in the details of the car accident and create like almost a photorealistic film of the accident itself. That's
Yeah.
and then you're
There's-
like, is that real though? Can we really base our decisions on like
There's an app.
that animation?
There's an app I'm going to send you where if we upload our podcasts, then we can tell it to create basically other simulations of conversations with us, because it will have enough material and samples of us talking our voices. So we could create other like short reels from it just by telling AI,
In
hey,
perpetuity.
yeah, take this, and then have Danielle talk about the 5 steps that you need to do when you get into a car accident when you're on the side of the road. And we wouldn't even have to sit down and actually talk about
It's
it.
so scary though, because like, I mean, the sinister applications of that are immediate to me, right?
Sure.
Like getting phone calls from people that you think are loved ones speaking
Yeah.
to you,
Yeah.
and telling you to go somewhere or do something or
Yeah.
probably send money.
Yeah.
Like that's nuts.
Right.
That's a sophisticated thing.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. And yeah, I mean, we're over the precipice, but I think in terms of like everyone having this now as part of their day to day, it's just right around the corner.
So how common are these sort of recreations, these video recreations of car accidents?
Very
Do you do
now.
this with every case now?
They
or-
can be expensive, but they're almost always worth it, because people tend to glaze over or just don't internalize. We could have had her up on the witness stand describing what happened to her, crying, and people only, I think, have so much capacity to take that all in as compared to watching it in a movie or a video. Because think about like a lot of the information and the entertainment that we consume, it is in that format. So I think we're better
Yeah.
trained to respond to that type of format as compared to just
Are there sound effects like
kind
screeching
of like
tires?
it's kind of like theater, like live. The difference between like live theater, where you're like in a monologue, if you imagine like just like an actor on a stage giving a monologue, compared to being in like an IMAX theater,
Right.
with all the sound and everything that creates the mood in an actual like cinematic setting. But
That's crazy. I'm thinking about it in terms of like other crimes. You know what I mean? Like, what if during the OJ trial they were able to play a compelling movie of the murder, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of like, we know that video is so powerful, obviously.
Right.
And
And
in
so,
court,
yeah, back to your point in like wondering, okay, what's real, what's not. The judge would be the gatekeeper. If that were to be played to a jury, we would have to show, and really in deposition, we could set it up. We could get their expert to, and their other witnesses to agree to certain facts. And then we show the judge, hey, these are the facts that were put into this video recreation, so that it's clear that it's supported
Right.
by the evidence that's there, that we would be allowed to have a witness testify and explain to the jury. It's just a different medium.
It's I mean, to me, it's like, the what happened in the accident or the crime or whatever is contentious. Like, this is like what we're in court for, and each side has their version. So I'm thinking with these simulations, are there versions of the simulations? You know what I mean? Like, the defense has their version and prosecution has their version, or when we're talking of personal injury, I know it's different players, but
right. So you'd have to establish to the judge that it was founded on the facts, based on the facts. We long before this type of technology in the courtroom, we would call it just a demonstrative aid, right? Like, could you bring in like a map and have someone draw on a map, just these visual aids that can then become evidence if you're having a witness use it to illustrate their testimony to the jury. It's just a more advanced version of that.
So when people come to you, and I'm thinking, and they've been involved in a car accident, and they're in the first step of wondering, like, I need a lawyer. When we're talking about the fault of the accident, what do you say when if we're doing role playing and I'm showing up in your office? Sure. I won't do the door sound effect. Maybe I will. The door just slammed. I'm walking in and I'm saying, I've been involved in a car accident, but it was my fault. I ran a red light. And I hurt somebody. What's your response to that?
We have intake questions, right, to help the person who's been in the accident kind of organize the information, because it is traumatic. You don't remember everything, and sometimes you don't remember the thing unless you're kind of directly prompted and asked a specific question. So first questions would be like geared toward helping walk that person through what happened. So after the impact, were the police called? Did the police respond? Was a police report taken? Do you have that police report number? Okay, great. So that's one of the first steps is we get the police report. And just because the police find the person at fault, like if you're calling me and you said, police found me at fault, do I have a case? And just because they found you at fault doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a case, but we have to dig deeper. So
do the police really show up and declare a fault in these typical accidents?
Typically, yes.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so we had one we settled recently for a minor who was on a bicycle, and the child was found at fault. There's by the way that the child was riding the bicycle in traffic, but the child's injuries were so severe that the insurance company of the vehicle driver thought, you know what, we're going to pay out this policy limit anyway, because the likelihood of us having to pay something, even though the child was found at fault, is great enough that it's just worth it to offer up the policy limit right now, which was like $50,000.
Interesting. So you can overcome the initial fault.
Yeah, there's a lot of math, and actuaries behind. Of course, we're dealing with insurance companies. They're
calculating damages.
Masters at figuring out their risk. So
okay, so
police report.
Yeah,
first
police
step.
report. First step. What next?
Then what were your injuries? Were you hurt? Did you go get treatment? Were you taken via ambulance to the hospital? So we start to isolate, where have you gotten treatment for your injuries? And then we start to collect those records. And if the person retains us, we get to that point. But in the initial evaluation, it's usually not going to be worth it for that person to bring us on if their personal injury side of their claim is really small. So if you've ever been in an accident and your insurance company or the other person's insurance company offers you a certain dollar amount for the property damage to the vehicle.
Right.
So that's the property portion of the claim.
No injury.
Then there's also a personal injury side where sometimes, hey, maybe you just your neck was sore for a week, but you never went to see anybody. And so then you try to tell the insurance company hey, I should also get some money because my neck hurts. Usually they say, We don't think so, right?
Right.
Unless you start to push back on them and say, no, like, look, I went and I got a massage or I got acupuncture, and you can start to work with them. But they're usually not going to offer up much money at all for the
I was
personal
gonna say,
injury side.
how much for a sore neck are we talking about?
I mean, they'd probably offer you maybe $1,000,
Yeah.
especially if you don't have any supporting evidence of going to a chiropractor or to get a massage, that kind of thing.
That's
But
still $1,000, but then if you have to use an attorney to get that $1,000, and it's not really.
no, I mean, I think if you can support, and describe your story well enough,
Yeah.
most adjusters will say, oh, it's worth it to make it go away for $1,000. And most people would say, oh, great, sore neck, $1,000.
I'm
It
just
could buy me
thinking
a lot of Advil.
That's a lot of Advil. I'm just thinking to myself, like, if I were in a car accident, at what point, what kind of car accident would it mean that I felt like I needed an attorney?
Yeah.
And to me, I don't know if you agree with this, but to me, I would be like, if I was involved in an accident and I was injured pretty badly, or I'd injured somebody else, that's when. If it's just the cars, I'm not sure how often lawyers get involved in that stuff.
No, not usually the property side, because we don't take any money for that. In fact, usually that's already been settled by the time somebody reaches out to us.
Right.
So, but on the personal injury side, you're right. If you have significant injuries, if you have to get treatment, certainly if you were taken to the hospital or you broke a bone or you had to get surgery, then you want to talk to an attorney, because an attorney is going to maximize what you can push the insurance companies to pay you. Because otherwise, they lowball people. They lowball people really badly. Sometimes even in egregious.
Like, how badly are we talking they lowball you? Because
I mean, yeah,
this is
they
something that
won't.
Ron likes to talk about in terms of criminal sentencing, right?
Right.
And like what the difference of having a good lawyer and not having a good lawyer is. Because you can end up doing a very short amount of time or a very long amount of time for a crime, depending on how good your lawyer is.
Yeah.
And it seems like this is true with the insurance companies and money.
Yeah.
As well.
I mean, yeah, we have been brought into cases when an individual who was savvy, organized, was making compelling arguments to the insurance company that they should receive, let's say, $10,000, for example, just based on their medical bills alone. And when we've come into cases like that, we have frequently been able to 10x them. Get 10 times the amount, because they know that people, they don't know how to fight for themselves. It's not a fair fight. It's not a fair fight against an insurance company.
An insurance company, even with a good lawyer, I feel like you're going against insurance company lawyers who are have infinite resources.
Yeah.
Infinite resources.
Yeah, if it fits into their buckets, right?
But their pockets are insanely deep. Like, that's why the whole personal injury industry exists, in part, is because the insurance companies have tons of money.
They are, but again, because they're masters at evaluating their risk, they know how much, what the top end of what they should pay now is, based on, if you want to say infinite resources, on infinite examples and mathematical calculations about where is their sweet spot in terms of how they can get out now, not devote any more resources to this case, and basically still make money on the deal because they won't be paying more later.
It's so scientifically managed too, I'm sure. It's the algorithms.
It is. It is.
So it seems like there are lots of cases where you're like, I could have got a lot more. How do you, as a lawyer, sniff out exactly how much more you can get?
Well, one of the variables is always, what are the policy limits? So what policies are in play? If you come in and do a consult and the person who hit you did not have insurance, then you're dealing with your insurance company so long as you have UIM or coverage. Now, a lot of people don't know what that is, but it's really important to have underinsured motorist coverage or uninsured motorist coverage, because you can get the same coverage on your own policy if you pay a teeny bit extra. It's honestly just a fraction of the value if you get hit by someone without insurance, or if they're underinsured, meaning they have a bare minimum policy. Like in California, that's a $15,000, $30,000 policy.
I'm afraid I don't have this, because I feel like a lot of insurance, like Geico, these kinds of places, they're like there's an insurance requirement in California, right? You have to have insurance, but it's just a minimum. You don't have to have that one, right?
No.
Because the contract professor last week said, if you don't pay for this insurance, make sure you do. And I think he was talking about this. So say it again. It's UM
or UIM. So it's underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. And yes, everyone, Look at your policy, make sure you have it. Because again, you're not going to pay much more on it at all, but it's going to get the same coverage that you already have on your existing policy and it will cover if someone else hits you and doesn't have any insurance coverage.
Because what happens if you don't have that and someone else hits you and they don't have insurance?
Yeah, we have a really sad example that we're trying to press and find other coverage for it now. But essentially, a successful individual worked his whole life, retired, loved motorcycles, started riding motorcycles, did not add adequate underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage to his policy. And he got T-boned in an intersection. Someone ran a light and caused his body catastrophic injury, but he didn't, there's not enough coverage to cover his medical bills alone.
Well, his insurance, he has insurance in other words, but it's not going to cover.
Right. So because the person who hit him had a bare minimum policy, which is basically $15,000. He could only get 15 from the at-fault driver. But then on his own policy, he did not have underinsured motorist coverage. So if he had, let's say his policy is, for example, a $500,000, $1 million policy. If he had underinsured motorist coverage, then he would have been able to cash out his own policy to the tune of $500,000, just minus 15, because the other person's policy paid 15, right? So he could have had another $485,000 in coverage.
That's insane.
It is. And it's just as simple as checking a box on your auto insurance when you
how much
renew
are we talking a month, Geico, for this?
It's not. It's like maybe a 10% increase
Really?
in your amount.
Yeah, I got to do that.
It'll depend on your carrier. Let's shop it. But
it's also like
so important.
It's important, but the part of it that's frustrating is something that I think this communicated to me, this idea in this Michael Moore movie Sicko from years ago about health insurance. I don't know if you remember this movie. It was the point of it was not about people who were uninsured. It was about people who were insured and then all of a sudden got some catastrophic illness and the insurance company wasn't covering it.
Oh yeah.
And the idea that you pay, it's like, what is insurance for? If I'm paying for it, I'm not this example you just gave of the guy on the motorcycle. He has his own insurance. And yeah, he didn't pay for the uninsured motorist thing or underinsured motorist thing, but he has his own insurance and he got hurt and they're not going to cover that.
No.
It sucks.
No.
That's wrong.
Reminds me of betting at the craps table. Have you ever played craps?
All of this sounds like gambling. Yes. Yes.
And if no number has been rolled, right? If that button is not on a particular number
right.
that can be rolled on the dice, then a 7 or 11 will win.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as someone rolls, let's say a 6, right? Then you're trying to roll a 6 before you roll a 7 or 11 because otherwise you crap out.
Yes.
So I don't know why your example just reminded me of that, where it can be the same thing, but if you haven't set it up right, then the same number can be a loser.
That sucks.
Yeah.
But it seems like that's what lawyers are for, in part. As I recall, a lot of the cases that were in that movie Sicko were of people who they had lawyers and they were trying to figure out how to get their medical bills paid for because they had insurance, but it just didn't cover that particular liver transplant or whatever it might be.
We can broadly call it consumer protection.
Yeah.
Because there are more sophisticated parties like insurance companies who devote mass amounts of resources to figuring out how they best position themselves to make money on their policies or the medical care that's being provided. We could think of a lot of different examples. So attorneys and other types of professionals, but here like a consumer protection attorney is there to educate the public and then hold those other parties accountable when they go too far. In not just, getting a competitive advantage, but really taking advantage of people based on some kind of deceptive practice.
Right. I mean, there's the deceptive practice, and then there's just the whole industry itself. I mean, having worked so much with insurance companies, how do you feel about insurance companies? How do you feel about the industry in just a general way? Because it feels like most Americans probably think of insurance companies and they're like, oh, that's an evil industry that's somehow profiting up. But I mean, it plays some role.
Oh yeah.
How do you conceive of it? Because it seems like there's a lot of room for frustration in dealing with insurance.
Right. Well, it's most tragic when you need it, you thought you were paying for it, but it doesn't apply. Sometimes that's like we represented a number of homeowners who lost their homes in the Thomas Fire.
That's right. Yep.
Some people had not, let's say, had bought their homes 20 years ago, but had never increased their coverage. So,
I mean, 20 years in Southern California,
and the purchase price,
the market has changed a lot.
yeah, the purchase price, like in 1990, warranted a certain amount of coverage, and then you hadn't increased it.
It's insane. I mean,
what you would be eligible to recover. So, but this is when insurance can be useful and helpful. And we did see a number of examples like that were positive, where people who did have adequate coverage on their home to cover a rebuild, and some companies were better than others about getting people who were suddenly out of their homes, completely out of the blue, money to pay for rent. Because it's a tight rental market here too, so that quickly became a problem, is everyone being displaced but still needing to stay in the community for their jobs and for school, but needing another place to live. So very shortly, like, there were no places to rent. So really, those people who had the insurance companies that were more responsive, who got the rental money faster, were able to find a place to live quicker, benefited immensely. And they were able to start the rebuild process faster and have adequate funds for the rebuild process, and not have to fight their insurance company on how much money they should be given to rebuild. So it can provide a great service in the case of a disaster. Same thing in a car accident case. When there is adequate coverage,
a little bit, it seems like
you usually do.
Yeah.
In
terms of the who's at fault with accidents, and when people come to you and they've been involved, does that have any bearing on you taking their case or how you're able to argue for them? Particularly, I'm thinking about my red light example is okay, also I was drinking, and also this was a company car that I was in, and I was working my job while I did this. It can get very complicated, right?
Yes, there's so many variables, which is probably why we say it depends so often an answer to most questions, because we have to dig into the facts. So if you are on the job and driving for your job, then it could potentially be a workers' compensation case, or there could be different coverage through your employer to either represent you or compensate you. You reminded me of one case we got from another firm. They were only looking at it to see if there was a dangerous condition of public property in the degree of the curve in the road. Then it ended up contributing to or causing the accident. They found that there wasn't dangerous condition, but we picked it up and just took it and got the family the policy limits, because what happened was the man was crossing the street to check the surf here on the one between Ventura and Carpinteria.
Yep.
And had walked across, and then walking back to his car, either to get his surfboard or drive to a different spot, he got hit by a car. And
People call that contributory negligence or something
there
like that?
There were varying, the witness reports all differed in terms of, did he step in front of the car, or did the car just not slow down or see him adequately? So there were all these ifs, which I think was why the other firm was only evaluating, okay, can we get the government on the hook for this?
Right.
In terms of whether or not this road is actually safe. But we were able to have our own accident reconstructionist look at it, rebuild it, write a compelling report, and we sent it off to the insurance carrier, and we were able to get his widow and daughter the policy limit, which was a sizable policy.
Wow.
So,
are there cases where there are both criminal elements and civil elements to it that you're working?
Sure. Especially, you can imagine if somebody's negligent, or leaves the scene of an accident, which can implicate a crime, vehicle code violation.
Defending them criminally.
No, usually we'd be representing the person waiting for the at-fault person to go through the criminal process.
I see. Right.
To see how that influences the PI case.
What do you think the ratio is in terms of taking cases of people who you're representing that are the injured party versus cases where you're representing someone who injured someone else?
The injured party. Certainly on the civil side is 99% of our cases are representing people who are injured. We call them plaintiffs, right? Because if they end up having to sue, they're the plaintiff, they're suing the defendant.
So that's funny, because my first example that I thought of was just me coming in here and being like, I need help because I injured somebody else.
Right.
And I don't want to be liable for it. You know?
And then they go through our criminal department intake process, and not our civil department intake process.
But it seems like, you're telling me that 99% of the cases are the other case, which is someone coming in and saying, I've been injured in a car accident. What do do I do?
Yes. In the civil department, 99% of people overall who contact the firm, probably 60-40, plaintiff injured side to criminal defendant side. But that has more to do with volume of who's contacting the firm.
Right.
But I think it certainly helps our civil plaintiffs that we know how the criminal process works.
Yeah.
So that we can use it to their advantage to make their case that much stronger.
Yeah. Well, if there's a criminal element and then there's a civil element, and then send them to Jennifer if a divorce came out of this case.
Yes, with the accident inevitably.
And there's child custody issues.
Right.
Yeah, no, we can handle it all here.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's funny to me, though, because it's repeated a lot to us as law students that the law is a seamless web, right? This idea that it all comes together in some way. And it feels like in this office that there's a seamless web going on because I don't know. I'm wondering now, like, because we started talking about cars, in terms of personal injury cases, like, what's the percentage that involve cars? Is it mostly cars?
Mostly cars.
Yeah.
Mostly cars. I mean, motorcycles, there's a lot. Big trucking cases we don't usually take. And those are often firms that will work interstate because, big rig trucks are usually going interstate.
World.
It is.
That's interesting.
Yeah, different regulations.
Like long-haul trucking and lawyers.
Yeah, there are a number of firms around the country that only do that type of accident. So, we do mostly vehicles, motorcycles, and now, as I mentioned at the start, e-bikes. So we'll have to maybe do another session on
with e-bikes. Mm-hmm. Well, just to mention e-bikes really quickly, I mean, they're in kind of like some sort of like unclear legal territory, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I see kids on these things riding by very fast, and I'm like, I think those two girls on that e-bike were like 8 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're like...
One of them's like hanging off the back.
Yeah, they have like
helmet.
Slurpees from 7-Eleven. They look like they are in traffic almost.
Or
and
one of them's like recording on their phone.
Yes.
Like, oh my God.
And I know that they must be getting hurt on these things.
Yes.
So what are the legal...
Yes. So doctors that we know and we talk to and use in our personal injury cases say it's quickly become like the number one top reason that they are seeing people in the emergency room right now is e-bikes. Unfortunately, it's a lot of kids.
And delivery drivers, like in New York, when I was living in New York City, the e-bikes had just taken off. And the delivery drivers, of course, love them because they're like, the seamless dudes are just zipping through traffic on these e-bikes, and there's a lot of hills in Brooklyn. So
have you been on an e-bike in Manhattan?
I have not.
I have, but I stayed in Central Park.
Yeah,
because
it sounds fun.
A little bit of street time. I'm like, nope, don't need to be doing this.
It's kind of a motorcycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not, but
right. But it can go pretty quick.
They also start fires. Like there have been a ton of like high profile cases in New York City of these like e-bikes. The charging, the lithium battery gets real hot. There's a whole world of like electric stuff that we're going to be litigating.
Right.
It seems like.
Right. The seamless web that your professor was talking about, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things that comes up in the law. The other thing is that, yes, everything's always evolving.
Right.
So if you can see and stay educated, and a lot of times I hear this from young lawyers a lot. Like, I didn't realize how much I wouldn't know, how much I would have to look up, how much, to the extent to which every case presents some kind of new issue that you've never seen before.
Yeah. That's something that has, I think, surprised me in some ways in just starting law school and doing this podcast with you guys, is how much being a lawyer is being a good researcher. Mm-hmm. And being able to be like, I don't know, but I can figure that out quickly. And like that seems a skill.
And sometimes there isn't an answer, but you're drawing on what's happened in the past, but then you apply common sense and try to problem solve and be creative. I think we excel there because I think we're intelligent. We're not afraid to think outside the box and argue something that we haven't heard someone else argue before, but it makes sense because it's founded on what has happened before.
And it also seems like you have a good community of like lawyers doing different things here. It's the kind of place that you could like lean out the door of your office and yell down the hallway to someone that's doing something completely different in the law. I think it was Judge Sabo who, one of my professors this semester, who told us that when he first started, like the first person that came in the door when he hung his shingle wanted a will. Like, can you like write a will for me? And he was just like, I'm immediately just like Googling, how do you write a will? And they're like, how much will it cost? And he's Googling,
Right.
how much do you charge to write a will? And
Yeah.
I'm like, and he's like, I feel like that's going to be a lot of what being a lawyer is. And I know it's a simplistic way of looking at it, but that idea that you have a skill in finding information quickly, talking to other colleagues that like know stuff, and
Yeah.
just like helping people that way.
There's a reason they focus on issue spotting in the law to see if you can identify where the issues may be and then how you connect them to figure out what the solution should be. When it's not just a form that's already created.
Okay, one last question before we go. We're talking about cars and personal injury. Are there other if you have cases in personal injury that are not car related? What are they? I mean, I guess there'd be workplace injury, but I know you guys don't do as much of that.
We haven't talked about Ron and my personal injury cases, have we?
No.
We're going to have to get at least him and I up here to talk about this. So
Okay.
he fell in a hole and broke his wrist, and I sat on a faulty chair that broke and impaled my ankle down to the bone.
Whoa.
Yeah, both of us recently in the last year and a half. So we both have our cases. So Ron's fall in the hole really wasn't his fault, but sometimes we call that generally
Was this
like
at the car dealership? Yeah, I remember him
Yes.
telling me this story.
Yes,
and I
it's
remember
terrible.
him having his wrist broken and doing the whole Facebook post about it. And I
Right.
was like, ooh, there. And I had just started law school, I think. I was like, oh, there's a tort there.
Yes. Yes, there is a tort there. And so we call that slip and fall.
Yeah.
Right? Or premises liability when there's an issue on the premises
The
that
classic,
pose
like,
a danger.
icy steps or something.
Yes, or like in a supermarket, if they have strict rules about how often they need to come through and just make sure like nothing's pooling in
Yeah.
the freezer aisle in a grocery
Those have
store.
been some of our first cases were
Yeah.
that. And it was like, oh, were they aware of it, of the puddle of milk that had been spilled? Did they have a chance to go clean it up? Like, those are
Right.
questions that I'd never really considered before. But I guess
Yeah,
they're
or
really
dangerous
important.
condition of public property. Those are harder because we always protect public entities a little more than we do private defendants. But like cracks in sidewalk. Like when I was a kid riding my bike home from Anacapa Middle School, there was a huge pothole that I hit. I'd never seen it before. Thankfully, I was wearing a helmet because I lost control of my bike and I kind of woke up on the sidewalk.
Wow.
All dazed. And I didn't realize what had happened, but right up my bicycle had jumped the curb and my head had gone right into this huge piece of asphalt
Oy.
that was there, like not far, you know, where the YMCA is, like just up from Anacapa.
Yeah, of course.
And I was so out of it. Someone stopped to check on me, and I didn't even think twice when they offered to drive me home. And they threw I didn't know who it was. They threw my bike in their trunk, and they put me in the car, and they went and dropped me off at my mom's house.
These are different times, man.
I mean, yeah, think about other
You were
like terrible
hurt,
things that
though.
could have gone wrong. Yeah, I was so out of it. I was probably concussed. I just
Did
didn't
you
realize
think
it. And then-
tort?
no, the rest of the night I was just kind of out of it and loopy. I wasn't thinking at all. I was kind of thinking. I was just thinking. I'm so glad I had my helmet on because
Yeah.
otherwise my skull would have been bashed in.
Has this firm handled cases like that?
Yeah.
Injuries like that?
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just wondering, like, because
Yeah.
people do get hurt in other scenarios.
Right, but I was thinking, so dangerous condition of public property, like, is that pothole a dangerous condition that the city could have been on the hook for? We usually have to prove notice and that it's not de minimis. So we're helping a client now who tripped and fell on uneven sidewalk downtown here. And just saying, because the sidewalk was so uneven and because we had witnesses who said, it's like out front of a Starbucks. So we had witnesses who go to the Starbucks all the time and said, oh, we've seen a lot of people trip there. And just sent an
I
investigator.
think I know where you're talking about.
On Main
Yeah,
Street?
Yeah, I might have
So-
a tort myself. I'm
Right.
looking up here.
Right. So you have to do some digging to prove that dangerous condition. So slip and fall, premises liability, dangerous condition, dog bites.
Dog bites. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had some gnarly dog bite cases. We have a few.
Did those
now.
go to insurance?
Yeah, homeowners insurance covers your dog. So
Really?
yeah, so a recent one we just settled for a substantial amount of money was we were suing this family that knew that their dog was a problem. And it was not the type of dog you would normally associate. It was like a beautiful golden retriever. It was like vicious Cujo golden. And,
I was thinking of Cujo, but
right.
like a golden retriever, that's the friendliest dog.
So let's say you're out walking your dog around your neighborhood and it bites someone, and then that person comes to us, then we would immediately send a demand over to the person who had the dog, their homeowner's insurance.
Wow.
And the homeowner's insurance will cover dogs. Unless you have an exclusion, some homeowners policies now have an exclusion for certain breeds of dogs. Or if you're on notice that the dog is a danger and you don't notify your carrier. But even still, we can usually wiggle around that. It's got to be an
What do
extreme
you mean
example.
certain breeds of dogs are not covered?
So
Or-
yeah, certain cities will have ordinances with respect to certain breeds of dogs. Like Rottweilers get targeted, pit bulls get targeted. Any pit bull kind of like related
Dobermans, those kind of like
Dobermans
tough guy dogs.
Yeah, so you check your homeowner's policy to make sure your dog isn't excluded from coverage, just in case.
Wow. It's a huge world of personal injury. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's many more stories to talk with you
But
about.
there's two
Yeah.
homework items there, right? Go check
Yeah.
and make sure you have underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage, and that your homeowner's policy doesn't exclude your dog from coverage.
Yeah, because your dog, even though that dog may be the friendly family dog, could bite someone and you could be on the hook.
Oh yeah.
I mean, dogs that bite kids on their faces,
Yeah.
like just, I mean, there are sad cases.
Yeah,
of,
we
like,
have
people-
one like that where little kiddo, his ear got torn. So
Oh, yeah.
the pictures are so sad. So,
sucks.
and now he's afraid around other dogs, understandably so.
Ugh, insure your dog, people.
Yeah.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks, David.